Welcome. My name is Joaquín Núñez for Post Media, and with me today is Steve Daines, Senator from Montana and Chairman of the National Senate Republican Committee. Chairman, thank you so much for your time.
Glad to join you.
Wanted to start with your work at the National Republican Senate Committee. Will it be accurate to say that you're the person in charge of electing more Republicans into the Senate this year?
Yeah, this is a elected leadership position.
Mhm.
After every election, the Republican senators get together a week after the election and they elect the new leaders for the next Congress. And I was elected by my colleagues to serve as chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. So my responsibility is to make sure we get our incumbents reelected and then to pick up as many seats possible. And in this case, our goal here is to get a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate here on November 5th.
In the 2022 midterm elections, we were all waiting for that huge and big red wave that finally did not come. Do you think it had something to do with the quality of the candidates in key states?
I think that was one factor. There's usually not just one thing that
Mhm.
decided the outcome there in 22. Obviously, a very, very disappointing outcome. Many believe we'd be getting the majority back in 22. And instead, we went from a 50-50 Senate, actually backwards, went to 49-51 into the minority. But candidate quality matters. One of the strategies that we incorporate in this election cycle
Mhm.
to find candidates that could win not only a primary, but also a general election. Candidates that had a broader appeal across for the American people, because you can't just win a primary. If you can't win a general, you can't win and serve back in Washington. As we say, winners make policy and losers go home. So we work to find high quality candidates. We try to minimize primary battles as best we could so that our
Mhm.
candidates get through primaries with the most resources possible, as well as the least amount of damage done in a contentious Republican primary. In that case, that's happened. We're very pleased with the slate of candidates we have running across the country.
Yeah, with that in mind, you endorse, for example, a Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, a Sam Brown in Nevada, even a Tim Sheehy in your home state of Montana. So you are happy with the final selection of the candidates?
Very much so. In fact, those candidates you just mentioned, Tim Sheehy is a graduate of the Naval Academy, and he was a
Mhm.
Navy SEAL serving 200 combat missions. His wife's a Marine. They have four children, of course, running for the U.S. Senate in Montana. He's running very strong right now in Montana. Dave McCormick in Pennsylvania, a West Point graduate, a member of the 82nd Airborne, served in combat in Iraq, and also a business leader. He's in a very competitive position now in Pennsylvania to win that race. Would be a great U.S. senator. Sam Brown, also graduate of West Point. Sam nearly lost his life because of an IED that blew up a vehicle that he was riding in by the Taliban in Afghanistan. And he's severely burned. If you see Sam Brown, you see he has severe scars on his face.
Mhm.
His wife nursed him back to health. She was not his wife then. They fell in love in the Berg unit in San Antonio, Texas. A great story of heroism and
Mhm.
patriotism. So he's in a very strong position in Nevada to win that race. Sam Brown's a great candidate. So we're very proud of these candidates. They've been American heroes on the battlefield, and now they want to keep serving their country in the United States Senate.
At the convention, you mentioned the huge problem with huge Democratic fundraising in Senate key races. How big a problem is this for Republicans?
Well, one thing we know, Kamala Harris can't do much, but she
Mhm.
can raise. And so there's been a huge influx of cash to the Democrats since she became their nominee. And she's moving some of those resources. She just moved $10 million from her presidential campaign funds down to Senate races for Democrats to help them. So we do have a resource gap, and we're fighting hard because we've got great candidates in winnable states, but the Democrats have a resource advantage at the moment. We're fighting back, working hard. that we want to keep fighting all the way until election day. But there is a concern right now about the gap in money. The Democrats have a lot more.
And can you explain for the average voter to understand why it's so important to have a majority in the Senate?
Yeah. Well, I think the stakes could not be higher in this election. Many see the importance of the presidential election as it
Mhm.
relates to future of our prosperity as a nation. President Trump has a balanced view on energy. Of course, Kamala Harris uh, suggests we should ban fracking. She's a radical. I mean, Kamala Harris is a far left radical. She's a San Francisco liberal. You know,
Mhm.
if you like San Francisco politics, you're going to love Kamala Harris. But now you think about the United States Senate, we play a very important role in confirming appointments and nominations from the executive branch. So the next Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, Director of the CIA, Administrator of the EPA, those all have to pass through the United States Senate. So if we don't give President Trump a majority, he can't get his cabinet put in place for starters, not to mention the Supreme Court, circuit court judges, tax policy. It's a really, really big moment to make sure we win the majority of the United States Senate to support President Trump and his agenda. It was one of the first meetings I had when I took over this job back in early 2023. I flew down to Mar-a-Lago and President Trump and I met. And I told him the most important thing we can give you as our next president is a Republican majority in the US Senate, because without it, you can't get anything done. And we all know there's significant problems facing our country today. The cartels, the crime, the fentanyl, the flood of terrorists coming across our southern border. This is why we need to have a strong president like President Trump and a strong U.S. Republican-led Senate that supports President Trump.
And talking about getting things done, and with your experience in Congress of more than 10 years between the House and the Senate, why it is so difficult to achieve a balanced budget?
Oh, it shouldn't be difficult, but there really aren't any incentives, or I would say penalties, for not balancing a budget. One of the first bills I've introduced, because I came from business, I spent 28 years in business before I came to Washington, was that if you can't balance your budget, we shouldn't get paid. Simple as that.
Mhm.
No balanced budget, no pay. Start hitting members of Congress in their pocketbook. Put the pain on the members of Congress. Because at the moment, Congress gets away with not getting budgets passed on time and not getting budgets balanced. There needs to be a law changed that suspends pay for members until they get the budgets balanced. I think we also need a constitutional amendment that would
Mhm.
require a balanced budget. Most states require that. And most states have much better fiscal conditions because they're forced to have to live within their means. Washington, D.C. doesn't have to do that. And we face now staggering numbers of $35 trillion of debt. And now deficits, which is the annual number, deficits in excess of $1 trillion for the foreseeable future. That's a huge problem for our country. And eventually, that's going to result in a crisis, probably some massive inflation and destabilizing of the dollar.
And don't you think Republicans are to blame too for too much deficit in the last, I believe, 2 decades?
Well, it is. This is a problem on both sides of the aisle. But I'll tell you what we've seen, the biggest acceleration in spending, and just most recently now under the Biden administration, they passed a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill right after Biden was elected, and they had Democrat control of the Senate and the House. That was inflationary. In fact, Lawrence Summers, who was Clinton's Secretary of Treasury, a Democrat, said, don't do this. It's going to be inflationary. You can't pour another nearly $2 trillion into the economy when there was already $1 trillion of unspent COVID dollars at the end of 2020. So you had that trillion plus another 2 trillion, that's $3 trillion of borrowed money injected into the economy. That was inflationary. We warned the Democrats about that. And sure enough, that really lit the fuse, the start of the inflation now at 40-year highs. I'll tell you, when we were talking about the insane fiscal policy, remember every Democrat voted for that. Every
Mhm.
Republican voted against it. It was Kamala Harris that broke that tie. She is now cast more tie-breaking votes as a vice president than any vice president in our nation's history. We've had 47 vice presidents. She now has broken 33 ties. That's the most ever. She surpassed the prior record holders of John Calhoun and John Adams, and they both served 8-year terms. She did this in 3.5 years.
Yeah, about Vice President Harris, I think it was yesterday she proposed to get rid of the filibuster in the Senate. Do you think that will be a good idea?
It's a terrible idea. And this just shows you at what lengths the Democrats will go because they thirst for power. And I'll tell you, it's a threat we should take very seriously if Kamala Harris wins and we don't have the United States Senate. They will eliminate the filibuster. And that becomes very, very serious. It's not just on abortion and pro-life policies. It also will be on Second Amendment, on gun confiscation. DC and Puerto Rico will become states, which gives them 4 Democrat U.S. senators in perpetuity. They'll move their court packing bill, which goes from 9 on the Supreme Court justices to 13. This would be a fundamental restructure of power, and the Republicans would not be able to ever get back in the majority again for probably a generation if they do this.
And again, for the average voter to understand, why is the filibuster so important to the Senate?
Yeah, so the filibuster requires a 60 vote threshold to get something done. And that's important because that requires basically a bipartisan agreement to get something done. If you just give the Democrats 51 votes and eliminate the filibuster, they will run and restructure our government. So it's not just about implementing higher taxes or more spending, as bad as that is. It's going to be about actually changing the power structure in the country, because there were only 2 Democrat senators that saved the filibuster last Congress. It was Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. They're both retiring. So it's a dangerous moment for our country. This is why I'm working hard to make sure we have the Republican majority back, because if they get it, they're going to do some radical things in the U.S. Senate. They will do harm to our country for a generation.
Senator, I think you served with Kamala Harris for 3 years in the Senate. What can you tell us about her? Because we are still in the dark about her plans, or her beliefs.
Yeah, well, they're covering all that up. I served with her. In fact, we sat side by side for 2 years on the Homeland Security Committee. She was literally my seatmate. Let me tell you who she is. She's the most liberal senator when she was in the Senate, in the entire U.S. Senate. They ranked 100 senators. GovTrack did. She was ranked the most liberal, more liberal than Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. So this is what the Democrats are doing now. They're trying to cover up her record. She's far left. Joe Biden grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. He's kind of an Irish Catholic Scranton guy. Kamala Harris is a Bay Area, San Francisco liberal. Those are her roots. She is a true far left radical. And they're covering up all of her past positions and statements because they're so radical that if that were known by all the American people, she wouldn't stand a chance to win the election. So they've got to cover that up, try to cover up her record. Look, I saw it firsthand. And this is not a personal attack on her. It's just the way she voted and the way she thinks.
The last question. What will be your message to those voters who are still undecided in the run-up to November?
Well, it's a consequential moment, and the world is watching this election. I remember the first president I got to vote for was Ronald Reagan. He believed in peace through strength. Remember when Trump was president, we didn't have the wars around the world. It was Biden's weakness, starting with his Afghanistan withdrawal that failed, that invited the Iranians then to get a lot more aggressive. It invited Putin and the Russians to get more aggressive. And then you saw Biden remove the policies on the southern border that opened up a flood of probably 13 million illegals coming into our country. So this is a really important time in our nation's history about peace through strength. We need a strong commander-in-chief. We need someone who believes in America and patriotism and the American dream. Kamala Harris believes in banning fracking, raising taxes, inflationary spending, appeasing the Iranians. not standing with our ally Israel, radical pro-abortion policies, allowing abortions up until the moment of birth of a baby. These are radical positions, and this is why we need President Trump, who will bring more of a balanced view on these important issues. And the world's watching this election, and I hope and pray that President Trump is elected, and I hope and pray that we elect a Republican majority of the United States Senate to support his policies.
Senator, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for your time.